Good morning to everybody, especially honorable judges, senior advocates, and my beloved young members of the bar. Lex webinar series is entering the 46th program today. And today we have Mr. Venkatasubramania Giri, one of the alumni of ILS Pune. He started his practice in Kerala High Court and trial courts in Kerala in the year 1985 under the tutelage of his father, Mr. S. Venkatasubramania Iyer, who was one of the first lawyers to have been designated as a senior advocate by the High Court of Kerala. Mr. Giri's areas of practice and expertise is very extensive and includes civil laws, land laws, constitutional law, service laws, and administrative law, inter alia, crucial very many subjects. Mr. V. Giri was appointed as an additional judge of Kerala High Court in the year 2007, and he became a permanent judge of the Kerala High Court in the year 2009. Citing personal reasons, Mr. V. Giri tendered his resignation in November 2009. Soon after demitting the judgeship, Mr. Giri started his practice in the Supreme Court of India. Mr. V. Giri was designated as the senior advocate by the Supreme Court of India in the year 2010. Mr. V. Giri's footprint in the Supreme Court of India is well set, and he is known for his prowess and caliber as an advocate before the Supreme Court. Lex webinar series is proud of hosting today's webinar with Mr. V. Giri as the resource person, and on behalf of co-host Ms. Hemalata, I wholeheartedly welcome Mr. Giri. Mr. Giri, sir, the forum is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Srinivas. Thank you, Madam Hemalata. The topic that we are discussing today, title of double jeopardy, scope and ambit of protection against double jeopardy. The concept of double jeopardy, or the protection that is afforded against double jeopardy as such, has its roots in the common law in England and also the Fifth Amendment to the American Constitution. In fact, double jeopardy as a term, as a euphemism, you find it in the Fifth Amendment to the American Constitution. There is a variation when it has been embodied in Article 20, Sub-Article 2 of the Constitution of India. And the same concept is thereafter reflected, or the protection that is afforded by Article 22 is also reflected in Section 26 of the General Clauses Act, and the provisions contained in the CRPC and IPC, to which specific reference will be made in the course of the discussion that we are embarking on today. Thereafter, the concept has been fleshed out in the protection that is available under Article 22, which, as is obvious, is therefore part 3 of the Constitution, and therefore is one of the fundamental rights, has been upheld by the Supreme Court and the other courts in the country. But the parameters have been delineated. And the manner in which the Supreme Court has delineated the parameters and laid down the scope and ambit of the protection against double jeopardy will be gatherable, if I may use a phrase, when one goes through the major decisions on that point. But before taking you to the major milestone judgments on this, it will be relevant if we have a look at the provisions in the Constitution, thereafter in the General Clauses Act, and then the provisions of the CRPC and the IPC. Please come to Article 22 of the Constitution.
Article 20, protection in respect of conviction for offences. 1. No person shall be convicted of any offence except for violation of a law in force at the time of the commission of the act charged as an offence, nor be subjected to a penalty greater than that which might have been inflicted under the law in force at the time of the commission of the offence. Subclause 2. No person shall be prosecuted and punished for the same offence more than once. And subclause 3. No person accused of any offence shall be compelled to be a witness against himself.
We'll get to General Clauses Act. It provides that where an act or an omission constitutes an offence under 2 or more enactments, then the offender shall be liable to be prosecuted and punished under either or any of those enactments, but shall not be liable to be punished twice for the same offence. Let's also read section 71 of the IPC and 300 of the CRPC together. Firstly, because 71 of the IPC defines the expression same offence. It reads, where anything which is an offence is made up of parts, any of which parts is itself an offence, the offender shall not be punished with the punishment of more than one of such of his offences, unless it be so expressly provided. Where anything is an offence falling within 2 or more separate definitions of any law in force, for the time being by which offences are defined or punished, or where several acts of which one or more than would by itself or themselves constitute an offence, constitute when combined a different offence, the offender shall not be punished with a more severe punishment than the court which tries him could award for any one of such offences. Let's also come to section 300 of the CRPC, which is an expatiation of what is otherwise provided in Article 20, Subarticle 2, and what is also reflected in section 26 of the General Clauses Act. Section 300 of the CRPC provides a person who has once been tried by a court of competent jurisdiction for an offence and convicted or acquitted of such offence shall, while such conviction or acquittal remains in force, not be liable to be tried again for the same offence, nor on the same facts for any other offence, for which a different charge from the one made against him might have been made under subsection 1 of section 221, or for which he might have been convicted under subsection 2 thereof. This is a conspectus of the constitutional and statutory framework within which the concept of double jeopardy has been developed and applied by the Supreme Court and the other high courts. Please come to Article 22 in the first instance. It says no person shall be convicted and tried for the same offence more than once. Is that the wording, Mr. Srinivas?
It says no person shall be prosecuted and punished for the same offence more than once.
That's right. Therefore, it uses the word prosecuted and punished.
Punished, yes, sir.
Yes. Therefore, the constitutional interdiction is against prosecution of a person for the same offence more than once. And of course, it also, the interdiction also covers, if you can't be prosecuted, you can't be punished as well. But the point is, the constitutional interdiction, therefore, brings within its scope and ambit prosecution for the same offence more than once. And it is when you come to section 300 of the CRPC that you actually have the wording of, if we go to section 200 of the 300 of the CRPC once more, a person who has once been tried by a competent jurisdiction for an offence and convicted or acquitted of such offence, if you pause here for a moment, shall, while such conviction or acquittal remains in force, not be liable to be tried again for the same offence, nor on the same facts for any other offence for which a different charge from the one made against him might have been made under subsection 1 of 221, or for which he might have been convicted under subsection 2 thereof. Therefore, take Article 22, read section 300 of the CRPC in the light of Article 22, or read them conjointly, and you have a position whereby a person who has been prosecuted and convicted and therefore punished for an offence A cannot be prosecuted and convicted for the same offence on the same set of facts twice over. It therefore is a reflection of a principle that nobody shall be vexed twice over for an act which is defined as an offence under the general law of the country. It could be an offence under the penal code. It could be an offence under any other statute. It could be an offence under any cognate legislations as well. But if it is an offence, it also would provide for a punishment. It also would provide for a prosecution and a framework within which the prosecution would lie. But it has to be the same offence. The emphasis has been laid by the Supreme Court in several judgments on the charging part of the section, or the charging part of Article 22 and Section 300 of the CRPC, which calls for an identity of the offences to invoke Article 22 and also invoke Section 300 of the CRPC. I'll come to that in a moment. But therefore, on a conspectus of the constitutional provision and Section 300 of the CRPC, what you have is a person is prosecuted for offence A and is convicted. And then you also, though the constitutional provision doesn't say so, Section 300 of the CRPC would also take in a person who has been prosecuted and who has either been convicted or acquitted. It really doesn't matter, because it doesn't say that as long as a conviction remains in force. Section 300 of the CRPC also takes in a situation where a person who has been tried by a court of competent jurisdiction for an offence. What is intractable is therefore the word offence, and there should therefore be an identity of the offence. For an offence and convicted or acquitted of such offence. Therefore, a person is tried for offence A, convicted, may be reversed by the appellate court, and therefore he is acquitted. But he can't thereafter be proceeded to be tried for the same offence, even if the facts are the same, even if the offence is provided for under a different enactment. What is to be looked into are the ingredients of the offence. And this is where the Supreme Court comes down in clear terms. I'll take you to the major judgments in a moment. But what is necessary to be borne in mind is the identity of the offence. In one milestone judgment, an argument was raised that two different sections of the enactment, this is special enactment, provided for separate offences. But there is an overlapping of one offence in the other, or they called it as an overlapping of one section with the other section. And therefore, if a person has been tried and then acquitted of offence A, cannot thereafter be tried or prosecuted for offence B, because one section has merged into the other, and therefore the offences have the same identity, and therefore Article 22 and Section 300 of the CRPC would come. This was the argument. This was considered and rejected. I'll take you to the judgment in a moment. But the protection under Article 22, like any other constitutional provision which therefore lays down the framework, is that you cannot be prosecuted and punished for the same offense more than once. But when you come to section 300 of the CRPC, it is broader, the protection is broader, and the protection therefore would take in a case where you have been prosecuted and then not only convicted, but it could be a case where you are acquitted as well. And such acquittal would afford you a protection of not being tried for the same offense on a subsequent occasion. But when you come to the latter part of section 300 of the CRPC, the protection thereunder, and this is what normally is referred to as autrefoy convict and autrefoy acquit, is where there is a previous conviction, there is a previous acquittal, and the protection would therefore be afforded by section 300 of the CRPC, therefore also extend to a situation where at the time of framing charges, or the court which had prosecuted and tried a person, the accused for offense A, could have charged him with, on the same set of facts, could have charged him with another offense, maybe of a higher degree, but had failed to do so. For example, they say 406 and 409. If on the facts, the court had earlier tried him for 406, but could have actually tried him for 409, and the prosecution has ended either in a conviction or in an acquittal, latter part of section 300 of the CRPC would. I'm just giving you an example. There could be other offenses also. Okay. We'll come back to section 220, 221.1 and 221.2 of the CRPC slightly later. But for the present, I would say that if you are therefore prosecuted for an offense under 406, but you could have also on the same set of facts been prosecuted for 409, but you were not charged for 409 but tried for 406 alone, and thereafter it is you have either been convicted or have been acquitted. On the same set of facts, you cannot thereafter be tried de novo, prosecuted de novo for an offense under 409, because the latter part of section 300 of the CRPC would come to your aid and would protect you from a twice over prosecution, and this would probably have the protection of what is called as double jeopardy. Therefore, the protection that against double jeopardy, the scope and ambit of double jeopardy as a concept is traceable both to Article 22 and Section 300 of the CRPC. Now, having said this, the manner in which the law has evolved over the years, and how the Supreme Court has considered the basic ingredients of both Article 22 and Section 300 of the CRPC, I think it would be better if we take the major milestone judgments on that point. The first judgment on that point would be Maqbool Hussain versus State of Bombay, 1953 SCR 730, that dealt with a case where a person was prosecuted before the Collector of Customs for an offense under the Sea Customs Act. And ultimately, there was an order for confiscation of the goods under Section 167 of the Sea Customs Act. Subsequently, he was sought to be prosecuted before the Criminal Code for an offense under Section 23 of the then extant FERA, which, as you know, has now been replaced by the Foreign Exchange Management Act. Question that was raised was whether the proceedings before the Sea Customs authorities was not a prosecution, and the order for confiscation was not a punishment inflicted by a court or a judicial tribunal within the meaning of Article 22 of the Constitution. Supreme Court held
that firstly, an order of confiscation of goods under the Sea Customs Act is not pursuant to or is not part of the punishment for an offense under the Sea Customs Act per se, insofar as you can claim or the accused could claim that it has an identity with the offense under Section 23 of the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act. Secondly, the Collector of Customs may not be able to claim himself to be a court for the purpose of an accused or a person who is prosecuted under the Sea Customs Act to the benefit of either Section 300 of the CRPC or Article 22. The court considered it in the context of Article 22. Thirdly, the proceedings before the Sea Customs authorities was not a prosecution, and the order for confiscation was not a punishment inflicted by a court or a judicial tribunal within the meaning of Article 22. Court considered it from the angle of Article 22. First judgment under Article 22, I believe, though I have not come across anything which is earlier than that. If there is anything earlier than that, it should be subsequent to 1950, between 1950 and 53. But I didn't come across the same. Anyway, please take that Maqbool Hussain has been treated as a landmark judgment. Associated with this, you can have a look at, in the same vein, you can have a look at 1969 2 SCR 438, which is the same as AR 1970 Supreme Court 962. The nominal citation would be Assistant Collector of Customs Bombay versus LR Melwani. The questions considered in that judgment, in that case, were whether the prosecution in that case was barred under Article 22 of the Constitution of India by reason of the decision of the Collector of Customs in proceedings under the Sea Customs Act. To that extent, there was an identity in the question that was considered in Maqbool Hussain as well, and that is why Maqbool Hussain has been referred to and relayed on. But there was also another question, which is interesting because one of the contention raised was whether the prosecution from the criminal revision petitions, which was being considered by the Supreme Court in the said case, whether there was a finding, since there was a finding by the Collector of Customs in the said case that the accused are not proved to be guilty, operated as an issue estoppel in the criminal case against the accused. That was a different facet of the question that was considered in Maqbool Hussain. On the first question, the Supreme Court held, because this was a case where the Supreme Court had reversed the High Court. On the first question, the Supreme Court held that a prosecution under the Sea Customs Act was not a prosecution for the purpose of Article 22 when it came to a criminal prosecution that was subsequently launched against the same accused. Prosecution in the said case, which was quashed by the High Court under Section 482. No, I'm sorry. It was actually raised. The plea under Article 22 and the plea under Section 300 of the CRPC was raised first before the magistrate who declined it, and thereafter before the division bench of the High Court, which had upheld the contentions, upheld one of the contentions to the effect that there was a finding by the Sea Customs, the Commissioner of Customs, that the accused were not guilty of an offence under the Sea Customs Act, and therefore the finding of no guilt would stand in the way of a prosecution subsequently under some of the provisions of the IPC. Now, what happened is, I'm sorry, not an IPC. I'll read from paragraph 5 of the judgment, which encapsulates the fact. The prosecution, para 4 and 5, the prosecution cases that the accused persons and some other unknown persons had entered into a conspiracy at Bombay and other places in the beginning of October 1959 or thereabouts for the purpose of smuggling goods into India, and in pursuance of that conspiracy they had smuggled several items of foreign goods in the years 1959 and 60. In that connection, an inquiry was held by the customs authorities. In the course of the inquiry, some of the goods said to have been smuggled were seized. After the close of the inquiry, those goods were ordered to be confiscated. In addition, penalty was imposed on some of the accused. Thereafter, on February 19, 1965, the Assistant Collector of Customs, Bombay, after obtaining the required sanction of the government, filed a complaint against 5 persons, including the appellants in criminal appeal number so-and-so, under section 120B of the IPC, with clauses 37, 75, 76, and 81 of section 167 of the Sea Customs Act, as well as under section 5 of the Imports and Exports Control Act. Before the commencement of the inquiry in that complaint, the first accused filed on August 33, 1965, the application mentioned above. This was the application which I had mentioned earlier, which was moved before the magistrate. Magistrate declined, went to the High Court. High Court accepted the contention, and thereafter the matter reached the Supreme Court. Now, Maqbool Hussain has been referred to, and the Supreme Court in paragraph 8 of the judgment referred to Maqbool Hussain and then went on to reiterate it has been repeatedly held by this court that adjudication before a collector of customs is not a prosecution, nor the collector of customs a court. In Maqbool Hussain versus State of Bombay, this court held that the wording of Article 20 of the Constitution and the words used therein show that proceedings therein contemplated are proceedings of the nature of criminal proceedings before a court of law or a judicial tribunal, and prosecution in this context would mean an initiation or starting of proceedings of a criminal nature before a court of law or a judicial tribunal in accordance with the procedure prescribed in the statute, which creates the offence and regulates the procedure. This court further held that where a person against whom proceedings had been taken by the Sea Customs authorities under section 167 of the Sea Customs Act and an order for confiscation of goods had been passed, was subsequently prosecuted before a criminal court for an offence under section 23 of the FERA. In respect of the same act, the proceedings before the Sea Customs Act was not a prosecution, and the order for confiscation was not a punishment inflicted by a court of judicial tribunal within the meaning of Article 22 of the Constitution, and hence a subsequent prosecution was not barred. The said rule was reiterated in Thomas Dana versus State of Punjab and in several cases. But what is also of some significance is a second aspect which has been considered by the Supreme Court, where the contention was that the finding of the collector of customs in the earlier proceedings leading to confiscation of goods under section 167 of the Sea Customs Act, there was a finding by the collector of customs to the effect that certain among the accused are not guilty of the act of smuggling which was mentioned there and which was alleged therein. Now, the contention was the finding of the collector of customs referred to would operate as an issue estoppel in the prosecution subsequently lodged, wherein the plea of Article 22, the protection of Article 22 and Section 300 of the CRPC was invoked. There, the Supreme Court referred to the concept of issue estoppel on the basis of a finding by the earlier court in a subsequent proceedings, whether it would constitute an issue estoppel, or in one judgment of the Supreme Court, even the word res judicata has been used. Though res judicata one would normally find only in proceedings under the Civil Procedure Code or in civil proceedings as such, but even the word res judicata has been used. In Sambashivan versus Public Prosecutor, Lord MacDermott and there the citation is referred to in the judgment which we are just now considering, but then I think it is 1950 Appeal Cases 458. Lord McDermott enunciated the said rule thus: the effective verdict of acquittal pronounced by a competent court on a lawful charge and after lawful trial is not completely stated by saying that the person acquitted cannot be tried again for the same offense. To that it must be added that the verdict is binding and conclusive in all subsequent proceedings between the parties to the adjudication. The maxim res judicata pro veritate acceptor is no less applicable to criminal than to civil proceedings. Here, the appellant, having been acquitted at the first trial on the charge of having ammunition in his possession, the prosecution was bound to accept the correctness of that verdict and was precluded from taking any step to challenge it at the second trial. And the appellant was no less entitled to rely on his acquittal insofar as it might be relevant in his defense. That it was not conclusive of his innocence on the firearm charge is plain, but it undoubtedly reduced in some degree the weight of the case against him. For the first trial, the facts proved in support of one charge were against him. No, for the first trial, the facts proved in support of one charge were clearly relevant to the other, having regard to the circumstances in which the ammunition and revolver were found and the fact that they fitted each other. The rule laid down in that decision was adopted by this court in Pritam Singh versus State of Punjab, and again in N.R. Ghosh versus Nikhil Ranjan Ghosh, State of West Bengal. But before an accused can constitute the above rule, he must establish that in a previous lawful trial before a competent court, the rule laid down in the decision was adopted in so and so. But before an accused can constitute the above rule, he must establish that in a previous lawful trial before a competent court, he has secured a verdict of acquittal, which verdict is binding on his prosecution. In the instant case, for the reasons already mentioned, we are unable to hold that the proceeding before the Collector of Customs is a criminal trial. From this, it follows that the decision of the Collector does not amount to a verdict of acquittal in favor of accused 1 and 2. Therefore, they left it at that, in the sense that thereafter they went into the question of delay in launching the subsequent prosecution, which was also held against the accused but in favor of the state. And ultimately, the state's appeal was allowed. But more about that, that is an aspect which we are not really concerned with the present case. But the question of issue estoppel and the question of whether a finding in an earlier prosecution would constitute res judicata when there is a lawful prosecution otherwise launched for a separate offense was considered by the Supreme Court in a subsequent judgment. I will take you to that later in a moment. The next decision with which we are concerned and which has given a conspectus of the earlier judgments on the point is State of Rajasthan versus Hatsingh and others, 2003, 2 SEC 152. Now, State of Rajasthan versus Hatsingh and others dealt with two offences under a statute which was prevailing in Rajasthan called the Rajasthan Sati Prevention Act of 1987, which itself was preluded by an ordinance of the to the same effect. It defined what is termed as glorification of sati. It also provided, apart from sati, which was prevented, which was banned and was made an offense under laws which was brought into force much earlier, glorification of sati by any act, including in that case by somebody who had taken out a procession, was also made an offense under the act which I just now mentioned. Now, in that case, I don't go into an elaborate reading of the sections in this. What is relevant is what is considered by the court in paragraph 8, where the court says, Article 22 of the Constitution provides that no person shall be prosecuted and punished for the same offense more than once. to attract applicability of Article 22, there must be a second prosecution and punishment for the same offense for which the accused has been prosecuted and punished previously. A subsequent trial or a prosecution and punishment are not barred if the ingredients of the two offenses are distinct. Then the court goes into the content of Article 22, 300 of the CRPC, 71 of the IPC, Section 26 of the General Clauses Act, refers to Maqbool Hussain, refers to State of Bombay versus S.L. Labte, to which I'll come to in a moment, and ultimately held that even if it is on the same facts, the identity of facts, and this I think is important, identity of the facts by itself is not adequate to invoke Article 22. Identity of the same facts. What is required to invoke Article 22 is identity of the offense. And this principle would apply in the case of offenses under the IPC as well. IPC and statutory offenses. Even if you read Section 300 of the CRPC, an interpretation of Section 300 of the CRPC has been rested on the amplification of Article 22 by the Supreme Court in most of the cases. In fact, they have been considered in tandem. But even if therefore one invokes Section 300 of the CRPC, punished, acquitted, punished, convicted, prosecuted, acquitted, but what is necessary for the purpose of invoking 22 and 300 of the CRPC is an identity of the offense. Therefore, on the same set of facts, a person is prosecuted for an offense under one enactment, a special enactment for that matter. In one case, it was an offense under the Insurance Act. Thereafter, it came to an offense under Section 409 of the IPC. There is a judgment which dealt with the same aspect. We'll come to that in a moment. That is the judgment of the Supreme Court in State of Bombay versus S.L. Labte, which is one of the judgments which I thought we should discuss. We'll come to that in a moment. There is a detailed discussion on the scope and ambit in that judgment as well. But what has been laid down in this 2003 2 SEC is that what is relevant is therefore an identity of the offense and not an identity of facts. Same set of facts by itself is not sufficient to invoke the plea of double jeopardy or Section 300 of the CRPC to resist a subsequent prosecution for a person for a different offense than the one for which he was prosecuted earlier. Immaterial is a question whether it ended in a conviction or in an acquittal. It must be for the same offense. And a nomenclature of the offenses by itself is not relevant. You look at the content of the section, you analyze what are the ingredients of it. If the act which is made punishable is the same, if the default or the deviation which is made punishable is the same, then the offense is the same. In this case, the Supreme Court considered Section 5 and 6 of the Rajasthan Act, rejected the argument that one merges into the other, said that there is no overlapping. In fact, you can do something which is an offense under Section 6 of the Act without it constituting an offense under Section 5 of the Act. And the converse is also true. You can do an act which is an offense under Section 5, but which is an offense only under Section 5, which may not be an offense under Section 6. And therefore, if that act by itself constitutes an offense under Section 5, and thereafter, and you have been tried for Section 5 and either convicted or acquitted, you can be thereafter tried for Section 6 if an offense under Section 6 is also made out. Because without touching on Section 5, you could have contravened Section 6, and the converse is also true. There was one aspect on which I believe, though section 300 of the CRPC has been referred to, I don't know, it doesn't seem to have been considered in that way. Because why is the latter part of section 300 of the CRPC not, why was it not invoked in that case? Or was it invoked and not argued, or was it argued but not considered? One cannot be certain, but it doesn't seem to be a detailed discussion on that, because according to me, suppose the same act constituted an offense for which a charge could be laid, or it is a case where the said act which is an offense, but for which an aggravated charge could have been framed by the court which framed the charge, which tried the accused when the question of framing of charges arose. Now the latter part of section 300 would apply, and a subsequent prosecution for what? Maybe for a different offense, but for which also charge could have been framed when he was tried in the first instance, then the latter part of section 300 of the CRPC would come to the aid of the accused. But that is not an aspect on which there has been consideration. Probably because, and this here I am speculating, probably because these are offenses under the special statutes. Maybe the chapter relating to framing of charges did not apply to them. Maybe it is a case where, though the contention that one offense merges into the other was raised, it was not accepted. And the court said that section 5 and 6 of the special enactment did not overlap with each other. And therefore, section 221 of the CRPC may not have been applicable in that case. Maybe that is the reason. But according to me, if at the time of trying a person for an offense, on the same set of facts, the court was competent to frame a charge against him for what one could euphemistically call as an aggravated form of the same offense, but the court chose not to do so, then a subsequent prosecution for the other offense for which he could have been charged but was not charged may not lie in the case of, may not lie in the light of the latter part of section 300 of the CRPC. The next judgment, which I believe is also relevant, would be one from 2003 1 SEC 122. Not a detailed discussion, but only to show that there was an argument that there was a prosecution of a person of the armed forces under the Border Security Force Act. Now, when he was being tried for certain offenses, certain misconducts alleged against him, the court had ordered a fresh trial, a retrial as it were. The argument was that I was tried earlier. It may have ended in an acquittal, or it may have ended in a part, in an order which imposed a punishment. But the point is, thereafter, there is an order for a fresh trial. A fresh trial is not possible because a direction for fresh trial would be hit by Article 22. I think it was a very, very optimistic, very adventurous contention on the basis of Article 22. But the court shot it down by saying that it is not applicable at all. It's only for the said purpose that there was an argument to that effect also. I had cited it only there, only for that purpose. Beyond that, the such judgment may not be very helpful in the present context. Now, the next judgment which I feel would merit a more detailed consideration would be 1961 3 SCR 107, equivalent to AR 1961 Supreme Court 578. I would commend this judgment for a detailed reading. Judgment by a constitution bench, judgment by Justice Rajagopala Iyengar. Now, I think it would be relevant, it would be appropriate if I read para 2 for the facts of the case and then take you to the relevant discussion. But its judgment starts by saying this appeal on a certificate under Article 134(1) principally raises for consideration the application and scope of Article 22 of the Constitution and Section 26 of the General Clauses Act. The facts necessary for the appreciation of the points involved in this appeal are few and may be briefly stated. The two respondents, S.L. Apte and Ms. Dwarakabai Bhatt, were respectively the Managing Director and Managing Director of Women's Department of an insurance company by name, the Long Life Insurance Company, which had its headquarters at Pune. The power of attorney had been executed by the company in favor of the first respondent in June 1942, under which he was vested with the power, control and possession inter alia of the monies belonging to the company with a view to have them invested in proper securities. The second respondent as managing director also acted under another power of attorney executed by the company in her favor in or about June 1942, and by virtue thereof, she was assisting the first respondent in maintaining the accounts of the company. While the respondents were thus functioning, an audit conducted in 1952 disclosed that considerable sums of money amounting to so and so were shown as cash balances with the first respondent. Further inquiries made by the director showed that monies aggregating over rupees 95,000 had from time to time been withdrawn from the company by the first respondent to the assistance and sanction of the second respondent, purportedly for the expenses of the company. Among the papers of the company was a voucher dated 9th of August 1952, evidencing the withdrawal of this amount by the first respondent and signed by him. And this also bore the signature of the second respondent in token of his sanction. The respondents, however, could furnish no proper account of the legitimate expenses of the company for which the amount was purported to be taken. Both the respondents were thereupon prosecuted for an offence under Section 409 of the Penal Code and also for an offence under Section 105 of the Insurance Act. The learned magistrate convicted and sentenced both the respondents for both the offences with which they were charged. The respondents thereupon filed appeals to the court of the sessions judge, and the learned session judge by his order dated so and so while conferring the conviction and sentence on the respondents under Section 409 of the Penal Code, while confirming the conviction, Penal Code, set aside the conviction and under Section 105 of the Indian Insurance Act. The reason for the latter order was a finding of the learned session judge that the sanction required by Section 107 of the Indian Insurance Act, which was a prerequisite for the initiation of the prosecution under 105, had not been obtained before the complaint in respect thereof had been filed. The conviction and sentence under 409 of the Penal Code, which had been affirmed by the session judge in the cases, have now become final. Subsequently, the insurance company obtained the sanction to the Advocate General of Bombay under Section 107 of the Indian Insurance Act and filed a complaint to the Court of the Judicial Magistrate, Pune, on 18th of January 55 against the two respondents, charging each of them with an offence under Section 105 of the Indian Insurance Act. The magistrate took the case on file and directed the issue of process. Thereupon, the two respondents made an application before the magistrate on 22nd of March 1955, praying that the complaint against them may be dismissed as being barred under Section 403(1) of the CRPC by reason of their previous conviction by the magistrate for the same offence under the Insurance Act and their acquittal in respect thereof, which I think was the 403 must have been the analogous section under the earlier Criminal Procedure Code. I think it is analogous to Section 300 of the 1973 Code. Pleading in addition that when the conviction by the magistrate stood, they had even undergone a portion of the sentence imposed, the learned magistrate over this plea on the ground that the acquittal of the respondent was not on the merits of the case, but for lack of sanction under 107 of the Indian Insurance Act, which rendered the magistrate without jurisdiction to entertain the complaint. The trial then proceeded with, and evidence was led, but finally the magistrate acquitted the respondents on the ground that Article 22 of the Constitution and Section 26 of the General Clauses Act were a bar to their conviction and punishment, State of Bombay thereupon filed an appeal to the High Court under Section 417 of the CRPC. The appeal was dismissed by the learned judges, who, however, granted a certificate on the strength of which the appeal has been preferred. Article 22 of the Constitution is thereafter extracted. 26 of the General Clause is extracted. 409 of the IPC, which is the same, which remains the same, has been extracted. 105, 405 has been of the IPC has been extracted, which remains the same. Offence under the Insurance Act is extracted. Before addressing, then paragraph 9 refers to the content of the offence under section 105 of the Insurance Act. 10 refers to the contention, main contentions which were urged. That, turning to the main points urged before us, we may premise the discussion by adding, stating that it was not disputed before us by the learned counsel for the state, as it was not disputed before the learned judges of the High Court, that the allegations to be found in the original complaint in criminal case number so and so, on which a conviction under section 409 of the Penal Code was obtained, was similar to the allegations to be found in the complaint under section 105 of the Insurance Act. It should, however, be mentioned that there was not any complete identity in the statement of facts which set out the acts and omissions on the part of the respondents which were alleged to constitute the two offences. Section 409 of the Penal Code and section 105 of the Insurance Act. For instance, in the complaint which has given rise to the appeal, the crucial paragraphs read as under. Then those are extracted. 11. It is obvious that on these allegations alone, the offence of criminal breach of trust could not be established, as they lack any reference to any entrustment or to the dishonest intent. But to this point about the difference in the ingredients of the two offences, we shall revert a little later. Even assuming that the allegations to be found in the two complaints were identical, that is how they proceeded. However, the question, remains whether to attract the ban imposed by either Article 22 of the Constitution or Section 26 of the General Clauses Act on a second punishment, it is sufficient that the allegations of the two complaints are substantially the same, or whether it is necessary further that the ingredients which constitute the two offences should be identical. These are then taken, the various other judgments are referred to. The Fifth Amendment to the American Constitution is referred to, which reads as, nor shall any person be subject for the same offence to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. And then the Supreme Court says, and it will be noticed that there as well, the ban is confined to a second prosecution and punishment for the same offence. Emphasis laid on the words same offence. Willoughby, after referring to the words quoted in the Fifth Amendment, says cases may occur in which the same act may render the actor guilty of two distinct offences. In such cases, the accused cannot plead the trial and acquittal of the conviction and punishment for one offence in a bar to a conviction for the other. An earlier judgment to the United States Supreme Court is referred to, and I think it is worth reading here for the manner in which the examples, the factual examples, have been posited for consideration. That's why the Supreme Court extracted it. There is a claim of violation of the Fifth Amendment by the imposition of double punishment. This contention rests upon the following facts. Of the 9 counts of the information, 4 charged illegal possession of liquor, 4 illegal sale, and 1 maintaining a common nuisance. The contention is that there was double punishment because the liquor which the defendants were convicted for having sold is the same that they were convicted for having possessed. But possessing and selling are distinct offences. One may obviously possess without selling. One may sell and cause to be delivered a thing of which he has never had possession. Or one may have possession and later sell, as appears to have been done in this case. The fact that the person sells the liquor which he possesses does not render the possession and the sale necessarily a single offence. Does not render the possession and the sale necessarily a single offence. There is nothing in the Constitution which prevents Congress from punishing separately each step leading to the consummation of a transaction which it has power to prohibit, and punishing also the completed transaction. If therefore the offences were distinct, there is no question of the rule as to double jeopardy as embodied in Article 22 of the Constitution being applicable. Then they refer to Section 26 of the General Clauses Act, and then Section 409 of the IPC, and then in paragraph 19 of the judgment, the Lordship say, it would be noticed that it is because of this provision that the respondents before us were originally charged before the magistrate in criminal case number so-and-so with offences under Section 409, as well as Section 105 of the Indian Insurance Act. Then the appeal was allowed. But there is one thing which is noteworthy here. In paragraph 18, in passing, it may be pointed out that the construction we have placed on Article 22 of the Constitution and Section 26 of the General Clauses Act is precisely in line with the terms of Section 403(2) of the Criminal Procedure Code, which runs, a person acquitted or convicted of any offence may be afterwards tried for any distinct offence for which a separate charge might have been made against him on the former trial under Section 235, subsection 1.
A single act or series of acts is of such a nature that it is doubtful which of several offences the facts which can be proved will constitute. The accused may be charged with having committed all or any of such offences, and any number of such charges may be tried at once, or he may be charged in the alternative with having committed some one of the said offences. If in such a case the accused is charged with one offence and it appears in evidence that he committed a different offence for which he might have been charged under the provisions of subsection 1, he may be convicted of the offence which he is shown to have committed, although he was not charged with it.
Had Section 300 been there,
Yes, sir.
in the same manner when the Supreme Court had rendered the decision in State of Bombay versus SL Lapte, I think the conclusion would have been different.
Different. Huh?
Because under Section 403(2), there was an enabling provision which enabled the prosecution to prosecute a person for a distinct offence, though it could be one for which a charge could have been raised, framed against him even when he was facing the first prosecution.
Oh.
That may not be available now in view of Section 300 of the CRPC, which says that if a person has been prosecuted and convicted or acquitted for an offence for which a charge could have been raised, framed against him when he was charged and tried in the first instance on the same set of facts, he cannot be prosecuted again on the same set of facts for an offence which may be technically a different offence, but for which a charge could have been framed in the first instance when he was tried and prosecuted in the first instance, irrespective of whether the prosecution had ended in a conviction or acquittal. Now, from here, we make a jump to a recent decision by Justice Bhanumati in State of Mizoram versus Sangna, 2019-13 SEC 335.
Yes, sir.
The concept of double jeopardy or the protection of double jeopardy would apply. There, Section 300, 239, 227, 173, and 191B of the CRPC, all of them are referred to. But that was a case where there was a discharge on the ground of an absence of a valid sanction. The discharge became final, but later the state obtained a fresh sanction and relaunched the prosecution. The plea of double jeopardy was raised, but the court negatived it in paragraph 13 and 14 and upheld that a subsequent prosecution with a valid sanction is valid and proper. In paragraph 13 and 14, referring to earlier judgments, In light of the above principles, considering the case in hand, even before commencement of trial, the respondent accused was discharged due to lack of proper sanction. There was no impediment for filing the fresh supplementary charge sheet after obtaining valid sanction. Unless there is failure of justice on account of error, omission, or irregularity in the grant of sanction for prosecution, the proceedings under the Act could not be initiated. Act would be in the Prevention of Corruption Act. Therefore, they refer to Section 19 of the PC Act also. By filing fresh charge sheet, no prejudice is caused to the respondent, nor would it result in failure of justice to be barred under the principles of double jeopardy. Under Article 22 of the Constitution of India, no person shall be prosecuted and punished for the same offence more than once. Section 300 of the CRPC lays down that a person once convicted or acquitted cannot be tried for the same offence. In order to bar the trial of any person already tried, it must be shown that he has been tried by a competent court for the same offence or one for which he might have been charged or convicted at that trial on the same facts, that is, he has been convicted or acquitted at the trial, and that such conviction or acquittal is in force. Where the accused has not been tried at all and convicted or acquitted, the principles of double jeopardy cannot be invoked at all. The whole basis of Section 301 of the CRPC is that the person who was tried by a competent court once acquitted or convicted cannot be tried for the same offence. As discussed earlier, in the case on hand, the respondent accused has not been tried, nor was there a full-fledged trial. On the other hand, the order of discharge dated so-and-so passed by the special court was only due to invalidity attached to the prosecution. Therefore, discharge on an earlier occasion in the present case on account of an invalid order of sanction was not sufficient to invoke the plea of double jeopardy under Article 22 of a such matter under Section 300 of the CRPC. Now, the plea of double jeopardy has been raised, again ambitious, even in the case of departmental proceedings, but that was negative. I'll just give the citation. In State of Haryana versus Balwant Singh, Shivraj Patil, by Justices Shivraj Patil and Justice Arijit Pasayat, 2003 3 SEC, page 362. The contention was negative, obviously, because it cannot be a case of departmental proceedings, even if it is a case where actually the proceedings under the Act or the rules was for misconduct, and misconduct was also defined under the penal law. But nevertheless, the plea was not found to be available. I will refer to one further aspect, two further aspects which might be of topical importance, and then give citations of some other judgment which would make very useful reading. There is a very short judgment dealing with 420 and 420 of the Indian Penal Code and 130 of the Negotiable Instruments Act. That is Kollavira Raghava Rao, 2011 2 SEC 703. Very short judgment, doesn't have much of a discussion, but it is relevant for me to read it because there is a subsequent judgment which is detailed, but which takes a different view. (2011) 2 SEC, page 703. Heard the learned counsel for the parties, this appeal has been filed against thee. So and so the facts have been set out in the impugned judgment. The learned counsel for the appellant submitted that the appellant was already convicted under Section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act, and hence he could not be again tried or punished on the same facts under Section 420 or any other provision of IPC or any other statute. We find force in this submission. It may be noticed that there is a difference between the language used in Article 22 of the Constitution and Section 300 of the CRPC. Article 22 states, no person shall be prosecuted and punished for the same offence more than once. Section 300 says, 300 is extracted. Thus, it can be seen that section 300 of the CRPC is wider than Article 22, while Article 22 of the Constitution only states that no person shall be prosecuted and punished for the same offence more than once. Section 300 of the CRPC states that no one can be tried and convicted for the same offence or even for a different offence but on the same facts. In the present case, although the offences are different but the facts are the same, hence section 301 of the CRPC applies. Consequently, the prosecution under section 420 of the IPC was barred by section 301 of the CRPC. With due respect, principle is wrong. No, the dictum may not be correct for more than one reason. First, it's the learned judges are right when they say that section 300 of the CRPC is wider than wider than Article 22. But that is different from saying that the plea under section 300 of the CRPC would be available even when the offences are different if the facts are the same. That's not correct. Right from 1953 Supreme Court, Maqbool Hussain, thereafter the other offence under the Sea Customs Act, Justice Rajagopal Iyengar's judgment, thereafter Justice Hegde's judgment in 1969, the citation which we have already considered. What has been repeatedly reiterated is that identity of facts is not the crucial factor for invoking Article 22 or Section 300 of the CRPC. No, there are other facts which come under the second part of Section 300 of the CRPC. That's different. What is necessary is identity of the offence. Obviously, 130 of the Negotiable Instruments Act and 409 of the IPC are different offences. And therefore, this dictum may not be correct. It goes against the grain of what the Constitution Bench of the Supreme Court has held in more than one judgment. This judgment was not followed in a subsequent case, subsequent judgment of the Supreme Court, which also dealt with a combination of an offence under the Negotiable Instruments Act and under the Penal Code. And that is Sangeeta Ben Mahendrabhai Patel versus State of Gujarat, 2012 7 SEC 621. Fairly elaborate judgment. I will just refer to the relevant paragraphs in 14 and 15, because otherwise it's a very elaborate judgment. But there is a conspectus of all earlier judgments on the point on outrify convict, outrify acquit. The question is posited in paragraph 9. The sole issue raised in this appeal is regarding the scope and application of the doctrine of double jeopardy. The rule against double jeopardy provides foundation for the pleas of outrify acquit and outrify convict. The manifestation of this rule is to be contained in section 300 of the CRPC, 26 of the General Clauses Act and section 71 of the IPC. All the earlier judgments on the point are referred to, and ultimately paragraph 23, para 22. The Constitution Bench of this court in Collector of Customs versus Melwani, which we have considered here, the offence under the Sea Customs Act, repelled the contention of the respondents therein that their criminal prosecution for alleged smuggling was barred because proceedings were earlier instituted against them before the Collector of Customs. It was observed that neither the adjudication before the Collector of Customs was a prosecution nor the Collector of Customs was a court. Therefore, neither the rule of outrify acquit can be invoked nor the issue estoppel rule was attracted. The issue estoppel rule is but a facet of the doctrine of outrify acquit. Then the following paragraph is relevant. This court has time and again explained the principle of issue estoppel in a criminal trial, observing that where an issue of fact has been tried by a competent court on an earlier occasion and a finding has been recorded in favor of the accused, such a finding would constitute an estoppel or res judicata against the prosecution, not as a bar to the trial and conviction of the accused for a different or distinct offense, but as precluding the acceptance, reception of evidence to disturb the finding of fact when the accused is tried subsequently for a different offense. This rule is distinct from the doctrine of double jeopardy, as it does not prevent the trial of any offense, but only precludes the evidence being led to prove a fact in issue, as regards which evidence has already been led, and a specific finding has been recorded at an earlier criminal trial. Thus, the rule relates only to the admissibility of evidence which is designed to upset a finding of fact recorded by a competent court in a previous trial on a factual issue, so-and-so versus so-and-so, and the other judgments on that point have been referred to. Merits a more detailed consideration, because if you bring it to a typical case of an offense under of a 130 of the CRPC and also 409, and please come to paragraph 37 and 38 also. Admittedly, the appellant had been tried earlier for the offences punishable under the provisions of 138, and the case is sub judice before the High Court. In the instant case, he is involved under section 406, 420, read with section 114 of the IPC. In the prosecution under 130 of the Negotiable Instruments Act, the mens rea, fraudulent or dishonest intention at the time of issuance of the check is not required. However, in the case under IPC involved herein, the issue of mens rea may be relevant. The offence punishable under 420 is a serious one, as a sentence of 7 years can be imposed. There may be some overlapping of facts in both the cases, but the ingredients of the offences are entirely different. Thus, the subsequent case is not barred by any of the aforesaid statutory provisions. Therefore, a subsequent prosecution under section 420 of the IPC was held to be not barred, and it was allowed to continue. I believe that I think I have heard, though I don't know, I didn't come across other reported judgments, might have been followed, but the earlier judgment by Justice Karju has not been followed. That is, Koravira Raghav has not been followed now. What is being followed is Sangeeta Ben Mahendrabhai Patel 2012 7 SEC 621. That is what is being followed now. Therefore, what is of relevance to many of the practitioners would be whether a subsequent prosecution, once there is already a prosecution under section 130 of the Negotiable Instruments Act, whether a subsequent prosecution for section 420 of the Penal Code would be barred or not. Going by what has been laid down in Mahendrabhai, Sangeeta Ben, that does not seem to be barred. But the question of issue estoppel would still be relevant, because suppose in a given case under section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act, there is a finding of fact that the check has not been signed or the check has not been issued, and a subsequent prosecution under section 420 of the Penal Code is inter alia rested on the actual issuance of the check. Then there cannot be, the prosecution cannot lead in any evidence which touches upon the actual signing and issuance of the check by the accused. That would be inadmissible in evidence. If that is inadmissible in evidence, going by the rule of issue estoppel, even if 420 of the IPC is therefore a distinct offence and therefore it doesn't attract 22 or section 300 of the CRPC, it would nevertheless be a case where the finding of fact in the earlier one, provided the judgment has become final, would stand in the way of a meaningful prosecution for an offence under section 420. But that all depends upon the facts of each case. Now, one case where the plea of double jeopardy, which are actually the number of cases where it has been upheld, the plea has been upheld are not very many. On the plea of issue estoppel, please also keep in mind 2011 1 SEC 284. The nominal citation is Monica Bedi versus State of Andhra Pradesh. It was even a case where somebody was prosecuted and convicted for some offense for faking a passport in Portugal, and thereafter was sought to be prosecuted when she came to India. The question of double jeopardy was raised. Court negative it, saying that, for one, your conviction for an offense in Portugal cannot stand, will not enable you to call in aid Article 22 or Section 300 of the CRPC, but on the basis that the offenses are different. Not because she was convicted and prosecuted for faking the passport, though that has been referred to, but the conviction and punishment has been undergone under a foreign law. Therefore, I don't find a very detailed discussion on whether that would be sufficient for a person to invoke Article 22, that you are convicted and punished on the same set of facts in a foreign country, whether that would enable you to raise the same plea under Article 22. I would say it does not. But anyway, here the Supreme Court arrived at the same conclusion, but on the basis that the offenses are different. In State of Jharkhand versus Lalu Prasad Yadav in 2017 8 SCC, page 1, by Justice Arun Mishra. I would commend this for your detailed reading. It's the Fodder scam judgment. Where there were allegations of misappropriation. But this arose. It was at the stage of 482 when the subsequent prosecution was quashed by the High Court. The allegation was that amounts were misappropriated from different treasuries by the accused. And therefore, there was a separate set of facts for different offenses being all under 409, 420, etc. Altogether grouped under the title of Fodder scam. Main allegation was that amounts were taken from different treasuries and misappropriated by the accused. The contention was that the allegation was that amounts were misappropriated from the treasury. The fact that different amounts were misappropriated or requisitioned from different treasuries at different points of time does not make it a case where it is not one series of transaction or one single offense. There was an earlier trial, and therefore the multiple prosecutions taking each misappropriation from a different treasury as one offense and therefore subject matter of one charge was a contention raised, but the contention was negative. On the ground, the offense is the same, 409 and 420, but each was a different transaction. And maybe the prosecution could have tried it in one. But the latter part of Section 300 of the CRPC was also considered and then said, no. This is not a case where that would stand in the way because the misappropriation took place at different points of time. They involved different persons. The fact that it involved some of the accused as a common factor doesn't make it that which had to be tried in one case. There is a very detailed discussion on this. I would comment it for your reading. That is in 2017 8 SEC 1. There is just one more judgment which I would comment for your detailed reading. That is where the plea of double jeopardy has been accepted on the ground that there is identity of offences. 2011 1 SEC 534. Institute of Chartered Accountants versus Vimal Kumar Surana and another.
The first question is what you have based on Kolla Veeraragava's case. The President raised a question that where an appellant is already convicted under Section 138 NI Act.
Okay.
If subsequently one more FIR is lodged under Section 420 for cheating or something, whether the second complaint is liable to be quashed under Article 20 subclause 2.
Well, this Sangeeta says that the subsequent complaint can be lodged. 2002 SCC 636. Learned
Yes, sir.
counsel for the appellant has further placed reliance on the judgment in Sagar Suri versus State of UP, wherein during the pendency of the proceedings under 138 of the NI Act, prosecution under 406-420 has been launched. This court quashed the criminal proceedings under section 406-420, observing that it would amount to the abuse of process of law. In fact, the issue as to whether the ingredients of both the offences were the same had neither been raised nor decided. Therefore, the ratio of that judgment does not have application to the facts of the case. Then para 636, same remained the position as so far as the judgment in Pulla Veera Raghav is concerned.
Okay.
I think ideally the court should have referred the matter to a larger bench. I think the lower court would be, High Court and other lower courts would be bound to follow Sangeeta bench
Yes, sir.
and the other constitution bench judgments as such.
Okay, sir. The rule of double jeopardy, will it apply where the accused was punished under section 304 of Penal Code and the wife of the deceased has asked for compensation? Could the claim for compensation be hit by Article 20 surplus 2?
If he was convicted and the
Yes, sir.
conviction remains in force,
Yeah.
all that Article 22 says is that he cannot be tried for the same offence or an associated offence
Yes, sir.
in a subsequent criminal prosecution.
But
That's what
compensation.
Article 22 and 300 CRPC also say.
Yes, sir.
But a claim for compensation before the civil court by the victim
Yes, sir.
is maintainable. That has nothing to do with Article 22. Thank you, Mr. Srinivas.
So I should thank you, sir, for your time and the way in which it has been deliberated.
Thank you, Mr. Srinivas.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.